So there was this really fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying psychological study conducted a few years ago.
No, the electric shock one, right?
Yes, exactly, the electric shock study. So they basically put participants in a completely empty room for, I think, 15 minutes.
Just 15 minutes.
Yeah. And they stripped away all smartphones, all books, literally every possible distraction. The only thing left in the room was a button.
Mm-hmm.
And the participants were told that if they pressed this button, it would deliver a painful electric shock. And the results were just astounding.
They really were.
Right. A massive percentage of the participants, and these were people who had previously stated they would literally pay money to avoid being shocked. They chose to voluntarily shock themselves rather than just sit alone in silence with their own thoughts.
It is just a profound illustration of human behavior. I mean, given the choice between physical pain and the discomfort of an unstimulated mind, people frequently chose the pain.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is, but it shows how we live in an era where we've, like, conditioned ourselves to be absolutely terrified of our own mental quiet.
Exactly. And, it's highly likely that as you are listening to this deep dive right now, you aren't just sitting perfectly still in a quiet room.
Oh, definitely not.
You're probably commuting, or maybe you're doing the dishes, answering emails in another tab, or just dealing with that persistent, low-level mental fog that comes from a brain carrying a massive cognitive load.
Right, which has essentially become the default state of modern life. I mean, we are always processing something.
Always.
And the sources we're synthesizing today, which include texts like The Architecture of Silence and The Cost of Constant Connection, they make a very compelling argument.
Yeah, they really do.
They suggest that we are living in the most connected era in human history, obviously, but the hidden cost of that connection is just a relentless stream of demands on our attention. Like, we have fundamentally misunderstood what silence actually is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because going through these materials, it becomes pretty clear that we usually define silence just as, like, a lack of decibels.
Right, like turning off the volume.
Exactly. We think it means turning off the music or, finding a soundproof room. But the texts define true silence, not as the absence of sound, but as the absence of demand.
And that distinction, I mean, that changes everything. Because if you're sitting in a perfectly quiet room, right, but you're mentally drafting an angry email to a colleague.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. You are not experiencing silence. Your brain is still fully engaged in task processing.
Yeah.
True silence is that rare opportunity for the brain to just stop filtering, stop analyzing, and stop reacting to external or internal demands.
It makes me think of the modern brain as a smartphone.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Because we essentially have like
Yeah.
50 apps running in the
Yeah.
background at any given time. You might only be looking at one app. Maybe you're just making a cup of coffee. But in the background, your brain is refreshing social media, replaying some awkward conversation from yesterday, and, anticipating a deadline for tomorrow.
Exactly.
And even when you aren't actively interacting with those background apps, they are actively draining the battery.
They are. And this brings us to the core paradox of the avoidance cost.
Right.
Because logically, if constant demand is draining our battery, then the absence of demand-like actual silence should be the obvious cure.
We should be running toward it.
Exactly.
Right.
But as that electric shock study showed, the cure often feels incredibly uncomfortable to actually administer.
Which begs the question, if the initial phase of silence is just this barrage of uncomfortable, unprocessed anxiety, why does it feel so awful? Like, what is actually happening in the brain when we finally turn everything off?
Well, what's happening is a biological shift involving something called the default mode network, or the DMN.
DMN, right?
Yeah. So when you are focused on a task, say, reading an email or watching a video, your brain uses task-positive networks.
Yeah.
But the moment you remove that external demand, those networks power down, and the default mode network kicks in. And the DMN is essentially your brain's background processing center.
So it's doing the behind-the-scenes work.
Exactly. It handles autobiographical memory, future planning, and self-reflection.
So the moment I put my phone down, the brain immediately starts running, like an audit of my entire life.
It does. It absolutely does. And if you have been spending all day or all week ignoring subtle stressors or frustrations and anxieties by keeping your task-positive networks engaged with constant noise,
which we all do.
Right. Then the DMN is going to bring all of that unprocessed material to the surface the exact second it gets a chance.
Right.
So the silence isn't creating those restless thoughts or that lingering stress.
It's just revealing what was already there.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how this dynamic creates a self-perpetuating loop. The sources actually call this the habit of avoidance.
The habit of avoidance.
Yeah. We experience the initial rush of anxiety from the DMN. We find it deeply uncomfortable, and so what do? We immediately reach for a distraction to turn the task-positive networks back on.
We grab the phone.
Right. Noise literally becomes a shield to keep our own unprocessed emotions at a safe distance.
So we are spending a massive amount of cognitive energy just keeping the shield up.
Exactly.
I mean, the energy required to constantly distract ourselves is actually far greater than the energy it would take to just sit with the thoughts and process them.
And that right there is the avoidance cost. Because those unacknowledged emotions, they don't vanish just because you drown them out with a podcast or a scrolling session.
That's still where?
They remain in the background, surfacing as, irritability, poor sleep, or just a sudden loss of focus.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
The less comfortable you are with stillness, the more dependent you become on continuous stimulation just to maintain a baseline of functioning.
Okay, but if the goal is to break that loop, how do we actually approach this?
Wait.
So is the goal here to force our minds to be completely blank? Because whenever I try that, it backfires.
Oh, completely.
I sit there, I close my eyes, and I just end up intensely focusing on how hard I am, trying not to think about anything.
Yeah, and the source material is very explicit on this point. Trying to force your mind to be blank is a fundamental misunderstanding of the practice.
Okay, good to know.
Your thoughts are not the enemy. The difficulty doesn't stem from the fact that you are thinking. It stems from how you relate to the thoughts that appear.
How we relate to them.
Right. In a state of constant stimulation, we are conditioned to react automatically. A thought appears, and we instantly attach to it, judge it, and follow it down a rabbit hole.
So the objective isn't to stop the thoughts, but to change the relationship to them.
Precisely. You shift from a state of reacting to a state of observing. Yeah. You notice a worry pop up, and instead of spiraling into a panic about the future, you simply note it. You might ask, is this thought helpful right now, or is this just a habitual pattern?
You just kind of watch it happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You begin to see your thoughts as events passing through your mind, rather than like undeniable truths that demand immediate action.
Okay, but at the initial phase is this really uncomfortable process of just observing our own mental chaos. How long do we have to sit there before it actually starts helping?
That's a real question, isn't it?
Because there must be a point where the biology actually shifts in our favor, right?
Yes, and the underlying physiology of that shift is just remarkable. To understand it, we really have to look at the nervous system.
All right.
In a world of constant digital and environmental noise, your brain is continuously filtering sensory input to check for threats.
Always scanning.
Exactly. This keeps your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, totally engaged. And it keeps your autonomic nervous system tilted towards sympathetic activation.
And that's the classic fight or flight response.
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, at least a low-grade version of it, where we are constantly braced for action.
Yes, exactly. But when you introduce true silence, that absence of demand, you are removing the sensory input that the amygdala is trying to process.
Oh, okay.
So without new input to evaluate, the body receives a clear biological signal that it is safe. And this triggers the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve.
Right, which acts as a profound brake pedal for your nervous system. It shifts you out of sympathetic activation and into parasympathetic activation, the rest and digest state.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because listening to you explain how the nervous system slowly settles once the input stops, it makes me think of the snow globe.
Oh, I love that imagery.
Yeah, like when we are constantly stimulated, moving frantically from task to task, we are essentially shaking the snow globe aggressively.
Right.
The water is totally cloudy, the snow is swirling everywhere, and you just can't see the scene inside at all.
That captures the mechanics of it perfectly. Because when you finally sit in silence, you don't have to reach inside the globe and force every single flake of snow to the bottom.
Exactly. You literally just have to put it down on the table and let gravity do the work.
Yes.
The clarity isn't something you force into existence. It is something that emerges naturally when you just stop shaking the glass.
That's spot on. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, That mental gravity is your parasympathetic nervous system taking over.
Wow.
As your breathing naturally deepens and your heart rate settles, the cognitive snow begins to fall. But this also has a dramatic impact on your emotional regulation.
In what way?
Well, the sources highlight that emotions, on a chemical level, operate very much like waves. They have a natural half-life. They rise, they peak, and they fall.
But when we immediately grab our phones to distract ourselves from a feeling of sadness or frustration, we're interrupting that natural chemical cycle.
Exactly. We don't allow the wave to crash. And this illustrates the profound difference between reacting and responding.
Reacting versus responding.
Right. Reaction is an automatic reflex of a highly activated nervous system. Response, however, is a deliberate choice. Silence creates a tiny but crucial gap between feeling a stimulus and taking action.
It creates a buffer zone.
It does. And that buffer builds incredible inner stability because you allow the emotion to complete its cycle without letting it dictate your behavior.
Right, so a minor frustration with an email doesn't have to escalate into an all-day bad mood.
Exactly. You feel the spike of frustration, you observe it in the silence, the chemical wave peaks and recedes, and you move on.
I mean, I can see how deeply beneficial that is, but we have to ground this in reality for a second.
Sure.
Understanding the neuroscience of the vagus nerve and the default mode network is fantastic, but how does the listener actually implement this? The modern world is not going to suddenly stop making demands on our time.
No, it definitely won't. But the most encouraging synthesis from all these texts is that benefiting from silence does not require retreating to a monastery or, finding a perfectly soundproofed room.
That's a relief.
Yeah. The golden rule here is that consistency is infinitely more important than intensity. The goal is to make silence a manageable part of what you already do, rather than adding a massive new burden to your schedule.
And that leads right into the 5-minute gateway practice outlined in the texts. It's presented not as a rigid set of rules, but as a highly adaptable framework.
Very adaptable.
It starts simply with the environment.
Right. You don't need a dedicated meditation space. You just need to sit somewhere comfortable where you won't be actively bothered for 5 minutes.
The edge of your bed, a chair in your office, even your parked car.
Anywhere, really.
But once you're sitting there, the real challenge begins, because the mind is going to start searching for something to do.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources suggest using an anchor, like the physical sensation of breathing, to give the attention something to lightly rest on. But honestly, even with an anchor, the urge to escape is agonizing.
It really is at first.
You hit the 2-minute mark, and the brain starts screaming that you need to check the time, or that you've done enough and should get back to your emails.
And that urge to escape is the habit of avoidance fighting back. It is the exact moment the work is actually happening.
Oh, interesting.
When you realize your mind has wandered off to plan dinner or worry about a meeting, the practice is simply noticing that wandering without any judgment and gently bringing the focus back to the breath. You are training the muscle of observation.
So pushing through the urge to check the clock is mandatory. You have to stay for the full 5 minutes to let the nervous system actually register the lack of demand.
Yes. And how you end those 5 minutes matters just as much. You don't want to jolt your nervous system right back into fight or flight.
Right.
Transition gently. Notice the physical shift in your body. Perhaps your shoulders have dropped or your breathing is slower before you pick the phone back up.
That actually seems incredibly manageable. But the texts also offer a secondary approach for days when even 5 dedicated minutes feels impossible, focusing on what they call micro-pauses.
This raises an important question about how we define the boundaries of the practice.
How so?
Well, micropauses are 30 to 60-second windows of silence woven directly into the fabric of your existing routine. You don't need to carve out new time. You just repurpose transitional moments.
Like sitting in the car for an extra minute before turning the key.
Exactly.
Or pausing for 30 seconds after closing your laptop before you walk into the kitchen.
Or even stepping physically away from a screen and closing your eyes for a moment. By attaching these pauses to habits you already perform, you are consistently giving your vagus nerve small opportunities to apply the biological brake pedal throughout the day.
Preventing the accumulation of cognitive load.
Exactly.
Which naturally leads to the concept of finding silence in movement. Because true silence is the absence of demand and the softening of our reaction to the world, then we don't necessarily have to be sitting still with our eyes closed to experience it.
Exactly. You can walk without listening to a podcast. You can drink a cup of coffee without simultaneously reading an article. You can look at a landscape without immediately trying to photograph it or verbally analyze it. It is the practice of observing the world without instantly interpreting, labeling, or judging it.
So what does this all mean? It reminds me of, well, initially I thought of it like wearing noise-canceling headphones, but that's actually the opposite of what this is.
How do you mean?
Well, noise-canceling headphones block the world out, which is really just another form of avoidance. This practice makes you more like a clear pane of glass rather than a sticky web.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the noise and the chaos of the busy city street can pass right through you without getting stuck in your mind as stress or frustration.
That is a much more accurate representation. You aren't retreating from the world. You are changing how the world's input affects your internal state.
Yeah.
You remain fully present in the chaotic environment, but because you are no longer compulsively reacting to every stimulus, your internal experience remains grounded.
So, tying it all together for the listener, it means that by anchoring these small habits, sitting through the discomfort for 5 minutes, utilizing micropauses, and practicing observation without judgment, you are ultimately reclaiming your own attention.
You really are.
You are taking your cognitive bandwidth back from an ecosystem that is algorithmically designed to harvest it.
You are intentionally overriding the default state of modern life.
Exactly. Silence in this context is not an empty, terrifying void that we need to fill with electric shocks or endless scrolling.
No, not at all.
It is a vital restorative presence that we must allow into our routines. It is the biological and psychological mechanism for moving from an automatic, reactive existence to an intentional, responsive one.
Beautifully said.
The modern world is not going to slow down for you. But the incredibly empowering truth is that you have the power to slow down your own processing starting today with just 5 minutes of non-demand.
And, perhaps the most profound implication of this entire deep dive goes far beyond just lowering our daily stress levels or improving our focus. It points back to that core concept of observing without interpreting. We spend an unbelievable amount of our cognitive energy applying instant labels, harsh judgments, and a continuous running commentary to the outside world.
We really do.
But consider what happens when you apply that exact same deep, non-judgmental silence to yourself.
That is a fascinating pivot.
Think about the internal narrative you carry. If you were to sit in that silence and slowly strip away the constant internal commentary about who you think you are, what you believe you failed at, what you still desperately need to achieve, and the heavy expectations you carry every single day.
Just strip it all away.
What is actually left underneath all of that noise? Is it possible that your true identity isn't the frantic, anxious story you feel compelled to keep telling yourself?
Wow.
Is it possible that who you really are is simply that quiet, steady presence? One that has just been waiting for you to stop talking, stop reacting, and finally listen.